In this lesson, we're going to discuss what is a solid-state drive. So a solid-state drive, or also abbreviated as SSD for short, is a semiconductor-based storage device that uses integrated circuits to store persistent data. Sometimes referred to as solid-state disk, it lacks any mechanical parts. And so that's probably the first and most important distinction between the solid-state drive and the hard disk drive is a hard disk drive uses mechanical parts. We talked about it. It has an actuator, it has a motor, it also has a platter. And in fact, the term solid state disk is technically inaccurate because there's no disk inside of a solid state drive. Typically faster and more reliable than a hard disk drive, and that's primarily because it lacks those mechanical parts. So now let's look at the history of solid state. Solid state is a newer technology when compared to the hard disk drive. But solid-state drives are not as new as you may think. We talked about hard disk drives being about 60 years old. Well, solid-state was invented in the late 1970s, so that makes it about 40 years old. It was invented in the 1970s by a company called Storage Tech, and those early SSDs were primarily DRAM based, so DRAM being the same components that make up memory. They were very similar. The only difference was these SSDs were persistent versus DRAM based memory. Flash memory was invented by Toshiba in the 1980s, and flash-based SSDs were invented in 1989 and started to become commercialized. And this is where an important distinction between solid-state storage and flash-based storage. You'll hear the term solid-state and flash used interchangeably today, and that's really because flash-based storage is what all modern-day SSDs are made of. And so that's an important distinction. So all modern day SSDs are flash-based, but the early SSDs were not. So today it makes sense to use those terms interchangeably, but now earlier, 30, 40 years ago, looking through the history, that wasn't always the case. And we talked about solid state, being around for a long time, but it took a while for it to grow in popularity because the cost per gigabyte was very high until recently. It wasn't until the last 10 years and probably even more like 5 years that the price has gone down, and we've seen a move towards solid state replacing a lot of hard disk drives in the market, especially on the SAS side of things. So now let's look at flash storage. So flash storage is non-volatile persistent storage, and this is what all modern day SSDs are made of. It's semiconductor-based storage, again, no mechanical parts, so no difference here, but it uses something that is important, and you'll hear the terminology or the term used all the time, which is NAND technology. And NAND technology is basically a form of logic, and NAND is how it stores data within the SSD. NAND supports larger capacities, so that was part of the reason why NAND was such a popular choice for SSDs versus DRAM, because it supported larger capacities. The downside is NAND is still slower than DRAM, but NAND is still very, very much faster than your traditional hard disk drives. So that pretty much covers what is a solid state drive and gives you some history and background on the solid state disk drive as well as flash storage. See you in the next lesson.